of course, the sip went down the wrong pipe. Hello and welcome and good evening all, or whatever happened the time of day it happens to be when you are watching this. Welcome to episode whatever I'm thinking 14 of Merriwether's World. And of course, as usual, I am joined by Merriwether, my daughter. We are having some technical difficulties.
It just
The
loaded.
Okay, the computer that she uses for some reason decided to conk out and is very, very, very slow. All of a sudden, we've done the usual rebooting, sacrificing a chicken, whatever it usually takes to fix a computer. So maybe it will suddenly click into reality and she will be able to do what she normally does. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit more difficult. So, what else do we have going on tonight? Can you do it? Oh, you did it wrong again. No name sponsor, though I do want to thank Janet mostly for sending us, excuse me. Janet sent us some money via PayPal through the Merriwether PayPal account. So thank you very, 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 very much for keeping the show up and running. Or as running as still nothing? Okay, well, you got me. We're just having some issues. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, maybe we are starting over again. Uh, one of these days, I need to do this like every night so I get the software mastered on how to do this. So either we missed the beginning or we are 5 minutes into the, well, 1 minute into the show.
You're not lying.
Oh, okay, what?
You're not lying.
I'm starting to see some names here, so.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Anyway, so we'll just throw this out here again.
I see this.
Thanking Janet mostly for her support of the show tonight. She sent us a nice little bit of money to the PayPal to Merriwether and I to keep this thing going. So yay, awesome.
Plus,
Aha,
also,
and
thank
according.
you to Julie Mosley.
Oh, Julie, did I say Janet?
Yeah. Is it Janet or Julie?
I don't know. Sorry.
We love you.
Yeah. All right. So tonight, a couple of house cleaning things. First off, obviously this week is not Christmas, but next week is the day after Christmas. And after discussing it with the family, even though I have to go to work that day, the rest of them will be home doing Christmassy stuff. We will not have an episode of Merriwether's World next week. So you'll have to join us after New Year's. Wow, that makes this like the last. Does this make this the last episode of the year? I'd have to look at a calendar. Wow, cool. All right. So, as stated on the event list and so forth, we will be continuing talking about medicinal plants, particularly the weeds and wildflowers that are found in Texas that have medicinal properties, properties that I have been able to confirm scientifically. I'd like, not me personally, but I focus on what has Western science proven the chemicals in these plants can do. And so when I'm saying this plant does X, it's because I have found enough scientific literature to support the, that statement that this plant does X. So that's because I'm a scientist, and so I like to be able to back things up scientifically. Occasionally I might throw in traditional uses like Native American uses, but I will point out when I do so what has been proven scientifically and what still remains to be tested. Or if it has been tested and found it doesn't do anything, I'll mention that too. Okay, we got a number of people, so let's get this show started. Moving on to the presentation. So last week we ended with chickweed, and since I'm trying to do this more or less in alphabetical order, that makes the next one chicory. You will be finding chicory really this time of the year, maybe in another month for sure. north of Dallas. So if you draw a line through Texas that cuts through Dallas, you really have to be north of that line to find chicory. But even in the northern suburbs of Dallas, if you know where to look, but it likes wasty, disturbed areas, roadside ditches, and things of that nature. No pun intended. So let me see if I'm doing this. Okay, so what is it used for? Well, most people, when they think of chicory, they think that really harsh coffee from New Orleans. But actually, there are a number of medicinal benefits from the root. When taken as either as a tisane, which is a fancy way of saying herbal tea, or as a tincture, which means soaking the root in alcohol. So different properties of the root. First off, it is a diuretic, so it will help flush out the system. This is particularly important if you have some sort of kidney or bladder issue, or even stones, something like that. It's going to help push those things around. If you're doing that, obviously you want to use the root to make a tisane or a tea, just so you get copious amounts of water with it. If you're taking alcohol, it's just going to dehydrate you, which is generally not a good thing, with especially kidney stones in particular, because you are probably on some sort of pain medication and you really don't want to mix pain medication and alcohol. But starting again, the root is a very decent diuretic. It has also been shown to have antibacterial properties. I think the bitterness, the astringency of that comes into play there. It can be used both internally and externally for treating infections. It is somewhat of a laxative, but a very mild laxative. Like if you're looking for help in that area, there are better choices. It's more, be aware that if you are drinking lots and lots and lots of chicory tea, you might want to make sure you are near the toilet anyway, but for more than one reason, say 2 reasons. Ha ha ha. Okay, sorry, I couldn't resist. It is a mild sedative, also on really the power of the laxative. Remember, the chicory coffee, straight chicory has no caffeine, but it does have some minor alkaloidal type sedatives. Nothing compared to a lot of the sleepy time teas like chamomile, lavender, passion flower, passion vine, those sort of things. Think of it again as a mild sedative. More, be aware that you may feel sleepy when you're using this rather than it's going to knock you out. And finally, it is an appetite stimulant. So the bitter components of the chicory help stimulate the production of bile, which basically triggers your stomach to say, hey, I need food to sop up this bile. So it triggers a hunger reflex. This is particularly good of people who are ill and just not feeling very hungry. So if you, for some reason, you want to stimulate your appetite without just looking at a box of Twinkies or something like that, the chicory root will be good for that. So again, I mentioned you want it as a tisane, a tea, or a tincture, and it is really only the root. The leaves, flowers, stems don't have much in the way of medicinal properties, unlike the dandelion. And again, you start looking for it really in January and through the spring. Do we have any questions?
Not so far.
All right.
It's loading all right.
Okay. Oh, quick question to those out there. Are we still having that echo effect with the sound? I fiddled with some knobs and dials here, so I'm hoping we don't have that brutal echo. But since we moved to the other side of the dining room table, we do have some issues with that. So let me know if we sound okay, or if I have to do something to adjust the sound. All right, moving on to another favorite of mine is Cleavers. Another name for this is Velcro weed, sticky weed, that bracken weed stuck to my dog or my goats or my horse or whatever. This is stuff that has tiny little hooks in the leaves and the stem that cling on to you. The main use of the cleavers, well, first off, it's loaded with vitamin C, which you get from making a tea out of it. But it's also, again, a fairly potent diuretic, and it helps stimulate the flow of the lymph system as well. But this lymph system flowing really is just a subclass of the diuretic ability, because it is more diuretic than the chicory root. Especially if you're making a tea, you're going to have to wee. So the amount you wee kind of triggers the flow of the lymph too, as the body starts going, hey, we need some more fluid because let's just get rid of everything. So the tea is, again, something you would drink to help flush the body of different infections, kidney stones, bladder issues, things like that. A friend of mine was going through some kidney stones this week, and I was dying to ask him if he would try a mixture of cleavers and wax myrtle leaves tea, but I figured he was suffering enough and I didn't want to mess up with anything. But someday, if I ever have kidney stones, which, God willing, I never do, but if I do, I'm going to start some self-medication just in the name of science because I'm too damn curious about this. Okay, so cleavers again, the sticky weed, Velcro weed, you'll find it kind of sunny fields, somewhat. It seems to, like the chickweed, it seems to like to clump up against, say, the base of fences or houses, buildings, trees, things like that, but it's usually going for a partial shade, partial sun border area, and then in fields. But it's a very unique plant, how it sticks to you. And if you can kind of see on the pictures, it has what's called a whorled leaf pattern, where it has 5 leaves that come out from the stem in a circle and go up the way like that. So very, very useful. You can dry it and make the tea from it later on to get the vitamin C and the diuretic and the lymph stimulation effects. Ooh, a question.
I think this is about chicory, but I'm not quite sure. Could a simple acid-base extraction be run to get the alkaloids from chicory?
That's a good question. I suspect yes, because you would protonate the nitrogen, making it more water soluble. So what this leads me to think is what happened if you made an infused vinegar with chicory, say an apple cider vinegar chicory infused blend. That might have some possibilities here. Make a note of that. Write it down somewhere, please. Okay, because I love these questions like that because it makes me think, ooh, could this do something? So just from the chemistry point of view, it should. Or even if you're making a tea from the root of the chicory, throwing in, a teaspoon or half a teaspoon of the apple cider vinegar, it's going to just be beneficial. It's not going to, cause any problems. So that has some potential there. Cool. All right. Next up is the red clover. So not the white clover, not the crimson clover, but the red clover. The red clover, it has the round balls of the white clover, but they're kind of a purplish, pinkish color, whereas the crimson clover, that has a very elongated, it's always hard to do this, very elongated flower cluster. So you want the red clover. The leaves will have the little white chevron, little V shape on it. So you'll find it again in fields, sunny fields. It's a winter to spring sort of plant. So it's around. Really, I start finding it not so much around Houston, unless it's been specifically planted. But if you get a little north, and especially to the east, like up through the Jasper, Jefferson area, and again, drawing a line through Texas, basically at that level, then all the way up into Canada. So hello, any Canadian people out there. This one's for you. So red clover, what do we do with it? This is a very potent medicine for women, and that it has what's called phytoestrogens. This, the tea made from the flowers, has been found to have some success as a hormone replacement for estrogen, which, among other things, helps control the hot flashes and menstrual irregularities. And we have a question.
You need to shrink so that the pictures show up.
I need to shrink. Oh, hey, whoops. Sorry. Okay, how's this? Okay, so red clover. So it looks like the white clover where it has the round flower head. The leaves have the little white chevron in them, the little V shape like the white clover too. Remember the crimson clover, which is in the same family, has an elongated flower head. You want the short red one. So the main uses of this, it's for women to work when they're having estrogen irregularities, which is hard two words to say together. So it's helpful both with menstrual issues, especially menstrual irregularities, like if things aren't flowing right, but also has some really good success dealing with hot flashes. So if my weird customer service lady here is watching, she calls me the weird science guy. I call her the weird customer service lady. So here's that one's for you. We like stabbing each other at work. Not like physically stabbing, more like verbally. All right, how you want to take these flowers, it's best to dry them and just store them until needed and then drink them as a tea. And where you will find them, again, in kind of disturbedy, fieldy areas where you would normally find other clovers. So not necessarily overrun high grass prairie type stuff, but more places that people let weeds kind of get away from them, but it hasn't completely reverted to wild undergrowth sort of thing. Any questions? No questions. All right. And I guess since no one has said anything about the audio, that we don't have the echo effect. Okay, good, good. Okay, another medicinal clover, and one I like, is the sweet clover. There's several varieties, and it has these white flower clusters or yellow flower clusters. And unlike even the crimson clover, which has a fairly thick, long, imagine my thumb was the flower cluster of the crimson clover, the sweet clover will be much narrower and much longer. Sorry, the sweet clover will be much narrower and much longer. So let me bring up, also the leaves themselves have a much longer, elongated shape, with kind of toothy on the edges. But it can have either white or yellow flowers. They both will work well. Now, if you take a tea from the sweet clover, a little bit of warning, it is a blood thinner. So if you already have issues with, hemophilia, or you're on some medications that interfere with clotting, this can make it worse. I look at it more the blood thinning properties used internally as a tea. Think of that as when the zombies come, you keep that in the back if someone's having a heart attack or a stroke or something where you need to thin out their blood. Generally, nowadays, I would be a little cautious about using it just because of that blood thinning effect. Now, used externally, so again, as a wash or a poultice, it has been shown to speed up the healing process to damaged skin, or, well, just wounds in general, but usually the wound is going to be on your skin. So a wash made from this or a poultice of the sweet clover will stimulate healing. And I saw Merriwether's hand go up, so.
The audio could be louder, is what they were saying.
All right, let me just crank that up some. Testing, 1, 2, 3.
There's also a question.
Oh, there's a question?
Yeah.
Oh.
Are there any benefits for men with red clover, or is it just women?
Let me answer this by saying indirectly. The happier the females in your lives are, that sounds suspicious, the better off your life will be. So if they are not suffering from the hot flashes or things of that area, if they're just feeling more all around comfortable, your life is going to be easier. This is something I've learned from living in a house full of women. But, you learn these things. So, but as far as men from a biological, directly beneficial, no, not really. No, I can't think of any. There's enough. It really, I have to double check, but I don't think it's even really been studied for that because they've found so much interesting stuff going on with the phytoestrogen properties that all the focus has been on that. If we have any doctors in the audience, I'm not sure if there's many benefits of estrogen for men. I know men have a small amount of it, but generally it's not something that's considered necessary in their lives in large amounts. Okay, back to the presentation. Oops. So sweet clover, again, you'll find this in the sort of disturbed areas, woodland areas, especially around streams and wet areas. It seems to grow better there. Excuse me, it becomes a fairly tall plant, topping out at up to 4 feet tall, and very, kind of like a very sparse bush, very lots of space. It's not like a tight, compact bush. It's very leggy or stretchy, stringy. All right, cockleburs. Last week we talked about burdock and all the good things it does for the liver, but around here in most of Texas, what you're going to encounter is the cocklebur, which is not really useful for livers. But the leaves, flowers, and seeds do have some properties when, again, taken as a tea. There isn't a lot of information on using it in an alcohol tincture. And the fact that it is an antispasmodic kind of makes me want to move away from alcohol with using it. So I feel for now just using it as the tea or tisane is probably the best way of consuming the cocklebur plant. So mentioned it's antispasmodic. It helps control, I'm not going to say like a grand mal, but they have found with smaller spasmic issues, it works. An analgesic are basically aspirin, so it's a minor pain reliever, fever treater sort of thing, but kind of focus on the pain there. It is antibacterial and antifungal. So again, we're talking the leaves, the flowers, and the seeds. It is somewhat of a diuretic. So, if you're going to drink it, drink a lot because you're going to flush it through the system. And it is, again, a minor sedative. I would put it under the power of a passion vine, chamomile, the traditional things, more, like we said, with the chicory, perhaps. And the sedative effect is part of the antispasmodic effect, too. The chemicals responsible for that. If I can stop for a minute, I just want to say, for those of you wondering where a lot of this information comes from, again, we have the, it's always hard, Herbal Vademecum by, see here, okay. Herbal Vademecum, there it is. Gasman Sendikari and Herbal Medicine in the American Southwest by Charles W. Kane. He has a newer version of this with a different cover, so keep that in mind. But those are two of my favorite books for really delving into the chemistry of the plants. And I believe Merriwether is putting links up. And I will also mention, if you purchase them through the links that she put up, we get 6% of the sales price from Amazon, like as a sales commission sort of thing. So, and Christmas is coming, though. I think the today might have been the last day to be able to order stuff to get it before Christmas. New Year's is coming. What a great way to help people with their New Year resolutions of being healthy. Just saying. Okay, so back to the cocklebur. Places you find it, again, disturbed areas, fields, basically anywhere you happen to be taking your dog, horse, goat, or any other fur type bearing creature or clothing wearing creature. They seem a bit more prevalent around wet areas. When I was out in Big Bend Ranch State Park, actually, there were a number of temporary ponds that just show up and fill with water during rains, and then it goes away again pretty quickly. But pretty much all of those were surrounded by a thick layer of cockleburs. And then eating the cockleburs in a number of places were the different wild animals, the deer and the donkeys and things like that. So it's a good plant. Again, just use it as a tisane or a tea for controlling, especially like spasmodic events and sedative type thing. Kind of basically helping you control your body, do what you want your body to do, if you will, as well as the aspirin and antibacterial, antifungal. No questions?
Nope.
No questions. Okay. Ooh, why is there a, okay, sorry. I saw a red dot and I was kind of concerned. All right,
Oh,
cute. Whoop.
one more. Age the cocklebur seed before tea? Question mark.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Do you have to age the cocklebur seed before making it into a tea?
Yes. The reason for aging it is, again, so you break down the cell wall. Now, if you have a mortar pestle type thing, you can try grinding it. But again, when it's green, it doesn't grind very well. So one of the nice things about the cockleburs is they remain medicinally active for a good month or two after, drying out on the plant, so you can still collect them and use them. And then if you want to store them longer, I would vacuum seal them somehow, but they're going to have a problem just because you got those spines. You probably have to break the seeds out of the spiny seed pods and then vacuum seal them, throw them in your freezer. Or just, yeah, you can't really store a tincture. Do the best you can. Is there another question?
Another question?
All right.
Uncle Paul asks, do you use the cocklebur in the middle of an event or as a preventative measure?
Okay, so to use it as a preventative measure, you would be constantly having to take it. And the problem is then you can eventually have too much of it in your system. On the other hand, during an actual spasmodic event, depending on the severity, it can be difficult and impossible for the person to drink anything. The key is understanding the precursor signals of a spasmodic event, if you can. And that's tricky. Usually if a person is susceptible to that, they might realize, oh wait, I'm starting to feel a little funny. That's the window when you need to get them the cocklebur tea. So it makes it a little tricky. Thinking about that, it might be possible to make ice cubes from the tea and then have those on hand. Worst case scenario, they really could try and chew up some of the seeds themselves. It's just the bioactivity is kind of less. I would also suspect, this is what I call a scientific wild-ass guess, or a swag, but if there are certain, like if you, let's say an epileptic who is triggered by flashing lights and things like that, if you know you might be encountering that sort of environment, it might be worth taking some of this tea before heading there. But it gets a little tricky giving direct medical advice. But in the scientific world, under controlled situations, they have found a reduction in seizures and spastic events taking cocklebur tea. Yeah, so I would think if you are aware of triggers or what sort of environments or where it might be where you really don't want to have an episode, take some of the tea to help reduce the chance before being in that. But yeah, just like drinking it every day, all day, probably not a good idea.
All right. And then, would this be good for migraines?
I did not find anything specific for using it for migraines. The way I see it, the cocklebur is pretty common and it's worth trying. I am blessed, knocking on wood, that I don't suffer from migraines. To my knowledge, I've never had a migraine. I've known some people who have, and it seems really, really terrible. I wonder if I could get them to drink some Cocklebur tea. It's it's always scary experimenting on your friends, especially if they already have some, medicine or something that they use, take, just because natural products can interact with the regular medicines to Western medicines, if you will. And if the thing hasn't been studied, it could be an issue. You never know what might happen. Thinking about the chemistry involved, I'm thinking though it might actually be worth trying. And I want to delve into this deeper. Um, Let me talk to some people. That's an interesting question. I like that question. Thank you. Didn't really answer it, but oh, we got another one.
I've heard butterbur can be used for migraines. Is it a cousin plant to
Which plant?
butterbur?
Um, yeah, it's in the same family. Um, the Cocklebur is generally more prevalent, and I haven't really looked much into the butterbur, uh, other than just going, oh, hey, butterbur. So I don't have it listed on the Foraging Texas website. Actually, I don't have Cocklebur right now either. I got a lot of plants I need to add to it. But in the medicinal properties, that's something I think I need to look more. But if it's offering some relief from migraines, that gives me hope that maybe the Cocklebur tea would. Uh, Experiments.
My volume's low.
Your volume's low? Okay, let's just put them both up. There we could. All right. Back to the presentation. Cucumber weed. Now, I generally like cucumber weed just because it's really, really tasty, because it tastes like cucumber. The main use for this, again, is another diuretic. So in the process of eating a lot of cucumber weed, be prepared because it will make you urinate a lot. So if you are looking for a common tasty weed, especially up through the hill country, there's tons of it up there right now. And people have heard me mention at the chemical plant where I work at here in Houston, there's tons of it growing all over in the cracks and the sidewalks and along the buildings, and there's no way in heck I'm going to eat any of it growing in a chemical plant. But the cucumber weed is another potent diuretic. So if you're adding it to your smoothies, let's say, just because it's a tasty plant, be aware that it may cause more urination, which generally for most people it's a good thing because it's flushing out the system. All right, and just the mimic, and I can never say this right, Alcalfa species. The main difference is the shape of the leaf. The Alcalfa has a shorter spade-shaped leaf, whereas a cucumber has a longer leaf. And then the edges of the alfalfa have the teeth, whereas the cucumber weed does not. It has what's called an intact entire edge, smooth edge, no teeth. So look out for this one. That's not the one you want. Okay, cudweed. Cudweeds are interesting. There's several different cudweeds that grow in Texas. There's a lot of it around right now. Some people often mistake it for plantain, which we'll talk about whenever we get to the pea section of the presentation. But you'll find this, it's a very common yard weed. So you'll find it in your yard, in parks, places usually where the grass gets mowed. It likes to hang out in those areas because during the winter people kind of stop mowing. And that's when you find it. It's kind of a winter spring sort of plant. Now the cudweeds, the interesting thing about let me go back one. One of the other ways to help you identify the cudweed is the cudweed has what's called a pinnate leaf vein structure. So when you look at the leaf, it'll have one center vein, and then the other veins come off that, like branches from a tree. So think pinnate. Plantain, the one that people usually mistake this for, has what's called a palmate vein structure, where the leaves has multiple parallel veins running from the base of the leaf, kind of like fingers from the palm of a hand. So the cudweed has the pinnate, one center, and multiple branches off that center vein. Also, when you flip over the cudweed leaf, you'll see that the underside is gray or white in color, whereas the top side will be either green or the really good one, the top side will be gray too. But you're looking for the plant with the underside in particular is gray. Now, all parts of this are used for breathing relief. So if you're having issues with congestion, asthma, emphysema, any of the cold flu symptoms where you're just having issues breathing, it's used a lot. Now, the Native Americans, when they would do it, they would smoke it. And people go, well, you know, how is inhaling smoke going to help a breathing issue? And the trick here, and I mentioned in my classes and so forth, is the Native American way of smoking is actually to breathe in the smoke and then swallow it into the stomach, not breathe it deep into your lungs. So just take it into the mouth and then swallow it. I mentioned the Lewis and Clark expedition in their journal. They mentioned this when they would have the peace pipe ceremonies with the different Native Americans along the Missouri River, and really everywhere there was tobacco. The Native Americans would start farting a lot during it. And finally, they figured out that's because they were swallowing the smoke rather than breathing it into the lungs. Now, when you swallow the smoke, you are still going to have all those chemicals readily available for your body to use. So it is actually a very effective way of taking medicine in. Then you can also make a tea from the cudweed, but the effect is actually slower. The bioavailability is somewhat reduced in the tea. So the overall, the cudweed is generally one of the medicinal plants that's really preferred to take in through smoking and then swallowing the smoke. Another name for it is the rabbit tobacco and everlasting weed. Now, the key to harvesting this is you actually want to wait till the plant is starting to die or turn brown there in the ground, because a lot of the really potent medicinal properties show up right at the end stages of life of the cudweed. So the longer you can leave it there in the ground, the more potent it will be, more beneficial to help with the congestion, asthma, emphysema, things of that nature. Again, I mentioned this shows up in yards and mowed areas in general, or areas that are normally mowed and then just kind of let go fallow during the winter. I know my yard is filled with it, but I harvest it later on, so it's all good. Winter, springtime, good plant. Ooh, we have a question.
Several questions.
Oh, good.
So all I can find is the cucumber weed mimic. Does cucumber weed grow up around Longview, Texas? Like what areas is it in?
Longview, okay. Yeah, it should. I've really found the cucumber weed from Galveston up through Jasper, Dallas, all the way up into Minnesota. This is a very common North American. In fact, let us go to foraging Texas. Cucumber weed. In case you don't realize, oops, why is this not working? One of the things on foraging Texas is a map of where the U.S. government has found these plants. So for the map for cucumber weed, we're cucumber weed. It's pretty common across Texas. There's some gaping holes up towards the Panhandle. And honestly, if you look especially at the Louisiana side, there's a lot right along the border of Texas. It's all over East Texas too. The main thing about it, it seems to like, how do I say it, like shady, well-drained soil. So it likes its moisture, but it doesn't like its moisture to stick around. It wants it to, water it and then go away. But look for it in shady areas, not so much the full sun, but areas that have some dampness but not drenched in water, not heavy, muddy, swampy areas. It seems to do very, very well in flower beds, especially on North and east sides of houses and buildings in general. But a quick word about the maps here. So I mentioned they are created by your U.S. government. They are, think of them as guidelines that if you see, so the green counties marked in with green are ones where the plant has been found, in this case, the cucumber weed. I found a good rule of thumb is if it's found in one county, it's often found across the border in the counties around it too, if you look hard enough. Unless there is something that really changes the ecosystem of one county to another. So use these maps in foraging Texas as a first approximation of where you might find it. But if where you're looking, let's say out in the middle of by say Caprock Canyon area or somewhere in that area where none of the counties are marked with it, there's still enough around that you might get lucky. All right.
You have lots of questions.
Oh, good.
Okay, so is mullein or cudweed more potent?
Good question. Personally, I would put cudweed above mullein. Mullein is easier to identify by most people. It's a big plant. It's more noticeable, so it gets used more often, is my main theory on that. It's just because people recognize it. It doesn't look like anything else. It's a very distinctive plant. The mullein, again, we're talking about here. It gets a better reputation. Also, the leaves of mullein are big and kind of gray, fuzzy. It just looks herbally. It looks great when you have a cluster of mullein hanging in, from your light fixture there. But from a medicinal chemistry point of view, I would put the cudweed slightly above mullein.
All right. So the question was, I was told rosemary would help with congestion by breathing the steam from rosemary in boiling water. Is that a legitimate way to take in the medicinal properties?
Yeah, especially things, let's go with rosemary. Rosemary has a very strong scent to it. That scent is due to what are called volatile oils, or oils that evaporate, have a very low vaporization temperature, very low boiling point really is what it means. So they evaporate away very easily. So boiling rosemary or putting in the steam and the heat from the boiling water will help extract the different essential oils from the rosemary, vaporize them and carry them up into your sinus passages. If you're sitting there with the towel over your head smelling them. Yeah, so that's great if it's a strong scented plant. In the case of cudweed and mullein, both those, the molecules responsible for what's going on are not volatile oils. They are heavier molecules, bigger molecules. They don't just float away. So you need extra help with them. So that's where the fire in particular, I mean, the things will be burning at 800 degrees or so. The heat around that is enough to vaporize the molecules in the cudweed and secondary in the mullein and drive them into the air. But just boiling the cudweed or even the mullein for that matter and inhaling the steam may not be the best way of using those.
All right, last question. Should you harvest cudweed after flowering?
Yes, mentioned the cudweed. You want to get it really at the end of its life. In fact, if you can leave it be until it's turning brown, the overall medicinal properties will be greatly enhanced. So, if you have a patch of it in your yard where you can protect it from, whoever does your yard, hopefully it's you, so you can protect it. But yeah, you want to you want the mature plant to the point where it's just died and it's starting to turn or has completely turned brown. And again, what's nice, those heavy molecules will last a while. So you have several weeks in which to start harvesting it after the plant has died. That it?
That's it.
Okay, I know sometimes I seem to go into random detail, so I don't know if I'm giving you too much information, not enough information, so just let me know if the answers are answering your questions, I guess. Just So, or if you need more information, or if I just give you too much extraneous information. All right, moving on. Curled dock. This is a common field weed. You'll find this like in farmers' fields, horses, cattle fields. Right now, it's going to be a low rosette of big green leaves. The leaves will have a slight curled edge to them, hence the name curled dock or curly dock. Later on in late winter, spring to late spring, they will have put up these brown rust-colored seed pods or seed stalks. And so if you look out over the field, you'll see these clusters of these brown seed stalks. They're very distinctive looking. Nothing else produces a seed stalk like this. If you go to the Foraging Texas website, there are more pictures. Most likely, once you see it, you go, oh yeah, I know that. What you are after in this is the root of the curled dock. So the root has multiple properties.
Shrink presentation.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, see, I'm looking at the presentation, not the software, so I don't see what's going on. But thank you, Tina, for the multiple monitors that allow me to do this.
Well, it's actually Miss Deborah.
Oh. Well, thank you, Deborah, for reminding me, but I was thanking Tina for the multiple monitors. Okay, so curled dock, it's the root. Now, the root is a strong laxative, not like colonoscopy level strong, but if you're having some issues, it's good to help, flush it through. It is a bile stimulant, and remember we talked about when you increase the bile content of the stomach, it triggers hunger, it triggers the desire to eat, so that's a good thing. It is antibiotic and antifungal, so it's good for that. And then what's really interesting is there's some really fascinating results testing it for working with type 2 diabetes, is reducing the issues with that. Both controlling the sugar in the blood and reducing some of the overall complications from the type 2 diabetes. Now, there's a certain thing you need to know about the curled dock in using this root, and you need to let it age for about a year. So take it out of the ground, rinse it off, and just hang it somewhere cool, dry, and just let it sit there for a good year before you start using it. These roots do get really big, and as long as you have a nice shovel, they're pretty easy to harvest a bunch of the roots. The plant, it might come back 2 years in a row, but usually it's just an annual, and it produces tons and tons of seeds. But from a food point of view, it's great, and from a medicinal point of view, especially if there's someone that has type 2 diabetes issues, this is a plant you want to know about when the zombies come, for helping control the issues with the type 2 diabetes. So using it after drying it for at least a year, during that process, you don't want to put it in a dehydrator because there's actual enzymatic activity going on in the root that's changing the molecules that are in there at the beginning into the beneficial molecules you'll want later on. So just hang it somewhere cool, dry, let it dry, check it for mildew, things like that. But once it's dried for a year, then you go ahead and make the tisane or a tincture out of it, and then you're good to go. When you find it, the root, it's summer through spring, really. Or sorry, spring into summer. After the seed stalk has come up, because you want the mature plant, you want it at pretty much the end of its life. So when the seed pods are turned that rusty brown color, that's when you want to start digging up the roots and letting the plant hang. Obviously, you do want to wash any dirt off it, brush it clean, rinse it with some water, pat it dry really well, and just hang it up and let it dry for a year.
Question.
Oh, question.
Miss Tina Marie says, well, being that it grows so low to the ground, if you wait until it is brown, will you damage it by rinsing it?
Rinse it gently. Now, you're more likely to damage, we're talking curled dock here, right?
See.
Okay. Yeah, you're more likely to damage it when you're digging it up with the shovel, because these roots will be long. big, huge roots. So, and if you nick it, that's an area where other fungus and stuff can get into it. So I would actually think if you nick it some, like if you damage the root while you're digging it up, you might want to coat that area with some wax or something just to make sure nothing can get in there. Uh, even like some Elmer's glue or a water-soluble glue, something like that, put over the wound and let it dry and seal. That's a trick with woodworkers. If they want to keep a piece of wood moist for or green, not dried out, to make it easier to carve, is they'll like smear glue over the ends or wax over the ends so the moisture can't escape as easily. Okay, presentation. See, I went back to the presentation. Ooh, it's 8:50. Okay, let's just do one more. Oh wow, it's dandelions. Okay. um, I'm just, there's a lot to talk about dandelions, so this might, well, we'll go in there. All right, so similar to the chicory, the dandelion, it's in the same family as the chicory, but most people say chicory is in the same family as the dandelion. A lot of the same properties, so the root and the leaf in particular have the diuretic properties, very potent diuretic. The French slang name for dandelion actually translates into the pea in the bed plant. That's how potent of diuretic it is. So, don't drink it before going to bed at night or, wherever you go to sleep. So very potent diuretic. The root and leaves have the antibacterial properties. They're a laxative, a minor sedative, and then the bitter contents will stimulate the production of bile, which will lead to hunger, which actually, quick word about producing bile. If you have some sort of obstruction in the bile duct, you don't want one of these appetite stimulator bile stimulating plants, because they will actually cause problems. They'll cause a backup of the bile, and you don't want that. So whenever you see appetite stimulant or bile producer, if you have an impaired bile system, these aren't plants for you. But the root leaf, very good for general flushing out the system, helping you sleep, and helping you eat. Now the flowers are really nice for a wound healer. One thing I used to do is make an infused oil, taking the dandelion flowers and olive oil and just letting them sit together for weeks at a time. Then straining out the dandelion, mixing in some beeswax, making a lotion for my daughter's feet for ballet, until my wife stopped me, pointing out that the wounds on the feet of the ballerina turn into calluses and scars, which they need to toughen up their feet. So in the case of ballerinas, apparently dandelion wound healing flower cream is not a good idea. But in general, if you have an issue with a wound, an infused oil or a tisane, a tea, or I wouldn't use a tincture just because putting alcohol in a wound would be kind of painful. So I should take that one out. But really a tea or a wash for the wound, or a salve or an infused oil. And the salve, of course, is just an infused oil thickened up some with beeswax. When you find the dandelion, it is going to be a wintertime plant. I found some this year in what I would still consider to be fall, but this year has been really weird for plants, especially the winter plants. A lot of them are showing up, 3, 4, 5 weeks ahead of schedule, which I mentioned last week. When you look at the sunspot cycle and they reduce solar energy, it makes me wonder if there's more to this sprouting of plants than just temperature and overall sunlight. I think there's something else going on, because a lot of winter plants started popping up much earlier than normal. Okay, we are at 8:54. Do we have any questions?
Can I trade Siri for a Merriwether?
I'll send you Miniweather. Okay, so,
Ooh,
ooh,
does it have to be virgin olive oil or does it matter?
I'm trying not to make a joke here with my daughter present. Uh, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be virgin olive oil. And the reason I like the olive oil for this particular thing when I'm making a medicated oil is because the oil, it is very slow, or olive oil in particular, is very slow to go rancid. It's very high in antioxidants. You can use other things like grapeseed oil, sunflower seed oil, safflower oil, but a lot of those you want to add some vitamin E. You know, you get the little gel tablets or gel caps of vitamin E and squeeze a few of those, you know, say 3 of those per quart of infused oil, just to slow down the oil from spoiling. Another thing, I switched over from doing the slow uh, windowsill sunflower oil multi-week, 8-week infusion to the 3-night hot oil infusion. Just to recap, though, hopefully you were all here last week, and we'll be here in 2 weeks for the, you know, as we continue on. But a lot of times now when I'm making an infused oil, I will put the plant in the oil, get some water boiling, put the jar of oil and plant in the boiling water, turn off the heat, and let it sit overnight. And so it's hit with the boiling water, but then the water cools rapidly as the oil takes in a lot of heat, but then the oil really never gets above, say, 160 degrees, rarely above 140 degrees. And then we'll sit, above 90 to 120 for most of the night as the heat exchange goes on. Uh, that speeds up the whole extraction process. And then I do that 3 nights in a row. So start the water boiling without the jar in it, put it in, turn off the heat, let it go. Are we getting a question?
Yeah.
All right, question.
To obtain plants not in your area, can you recommend a trusted online source for dried wild plants, roots, and or mushrooms?
Okay, mushrooms, fungi.com, the Fungi Perfecti, that is by Paul Stamets. I would not, honestly, when it comes to, there's been so many bogus uh, herbal, plants put on, extractions and so forth, put up for sale. The FDA has studied some and found absolutely no trace of the plants they claim to be. So the only person I truly trust for mushrooms is Paul Stamets. Sorry, other mushroom sellers. Or, of course, there's like Robert Patrick, was it Indian Wind or Indian Spring Mushroom Farm? If you can get the mushrooms, there's some people on the Facebook page here that can hook you up with real mushrooms. As far as the other herbs, I haven't ordered many. I've heard good things. What is it? Mountain Rose is probably the big one. Um, but honestly, if I can't grow it, I stick to things, I don't try and use it. I'll look up the information. Sometimes I'll trade with people online, or people will take pity on me and send me some dried plant. Back after the bicycle accident in 2014, when I was all messed up, I received all sorts of great care packages from different herbalists all around the country with all sorts of wonderful plant herbs. But that doesn't help you. Yeah, start with the mountain rose herbs, I think is the main one. Yeah, it's tricky because there's so many people trying to cash in on all that right now, and you don't know if you're just getting a bag of yard clippings. Do we have another question?
Alright, one last question. I found plantain sprouting in Bandera. Isn't it early for that?
All right, plantain. That is one of the winter plants that has been showing up a lot earlier than normal. Started finding it here in the Houston area in late September, which freaked me out. So yeah, it's early, but for whatever reason, this year and last year, it seems to be par for the course. Okay, we are at 8:59, so we have 1 minute left. So it is time for Merriwether's words of wisdom. Okay, we'll get you in here. Oops. There. There we go. Okay, so here's my words of wisdom for today. The first rule of juggling hand grenades: don't. There are going to be many times in your life where you are, someone's going to hand you some hand grenades to juggle. And hand grenades do what hand grenades do. They destroy things. So if there is any way you can avoid juggling hand grenades, avoid juggling hand grenades. You know, it's okay to say no to people. It really is, because they aren't you, and you have to take care of yourself. Now, there are certain obligations, family and so forth, but in the end, the hand grenades are a whole different class of people, different class of situations. And like I said, first rule of juggling hand grenades: don't do it. Okay, at that point, I guess we're going to sign.
Merry Christmas. Happy
Oh,
New Year.
yeah. Happy holidays, Merry
See
Christmas,
you
Happy
after.
New Year, Advent, Happy Advent.
Happy Advent if you celebrate that. Happy Hanukkah if you celebrate that.
Yeah. So solstice. Oh, that's coming up here too.
Solstice.
Solstice. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, people. Have a great night, and like I said, I'll see you in 2 weeks, or we will see you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.
But I'll still be posting stuff on Instagram and Facebook and all that, so you're not completely rid of me. Okay.
Or me.
Or her. Okay. Good night, everyone.